Marcus Wilson sent the invitation on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting his car outside the jeweler where he'd just picked up the wedding bands. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, the kind that made a statement before you even opened it. Inside, embossed lettering announced his wedding to Simone Taylor, a woman 10 years younger, a woman who laughed easily, a woman who hadn't watched him become the man he swore he'd never be. He addressed it carefully, his ex-wife's name in his own handwriting, Ms. Diane Wilson. Not Diane Miller, her maiden name. Not Diane anything else. Wilson, like he still owned something. Like he was reminding her. He didn't tell Simone what he'd done. Not yet. But as he dropped that envelope in the mailbox, he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not since the divorce papers came through. He felt like he'd won. But winning and healing are not the same thing. And sometimes, the very moment you think you've proven something is the moment everything you've been running from finally catches up. Before we go any further, it's worth pausing here for a moment. If this story is already stirring something in you, something quiet, something you recognize, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't yet. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is realize we're not alone in what we've carried. Now, let's keep going. The invitation sat on Diane's kitchen counter for 2 days before she opened it. She'd recognized Marcus's handwriting immediately. After 15 years of marriage, you know a person's penmanship the way you know their breathing pattern in sleep. She let it sit there, untouched, while she made breakfast for her daughter Kennedy, while she answered emails for work, while she watered the plants on the windowsill that got the morning light just right. Kennedy was 16 now, old enough to notice her mother's silence, old enough to see the envelope and ask, "You gonna open that?" Diane had looked at her daughter, this girl with her father's eyes and her grandmother's quiet strength, and said simply, "Eventually." When she finally did open it, she read it twice. Once standing by the counter, once sitting down. "Mr. Marcus Anthony Wilson and Ms. Simone Taylor request the honor of your presence." The ceremony would be held at the estate on Riverside, the same venue where Diane's best friend had gotten married 5 years ago. The same place Diane had told Marcus she wanted for their vow renewal before everything fell apart. He would have known that. He would have remembered. The real question wasn't why he'd sent it. The real question was why she was considering going. Marcus had met Simone at a work conference in Charlotte. He was a regional manager for a logistics company. She worked in corporate communications for a tech startup. They'd ended up at the same hotel bar after a long day of panels and networking, both scrolling through their phones, both looking for an excuse not to go back to an empty room. The conversation had been easy. She'd laughed at his jokes. She'd asked about his work like it mattered. She hadn't looked at him like she was disappointed yet. That was 2 years after the divorce. 2 years of living in a one-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of takeout. 2 years of seeing Kennedy every other weekend and trying to be the kind of father who could make up for absence with presence, even though he didn't really know how. 2 years of waking up angry at a woman who wasn't there anymore, angry at himself for reasons he couldn't name, angry at the version of him that had let everything slip through his fingers without even noticing. Simone didn't know that Marcus. She only knew the one he'd rebuilt. When he proposed 6 months ago, he'd done it right. Rooftop restaurant, sunset, a ring he'd saved for. She'd cried and said yes, and told him she'd never felt safer with anyone. And he believed, for a moment, that he'd finally done something right. That he'd finally proven he wasn't the man Diane had left. But then the wedding planning started. And every decision, the venue, the flowers, the first dance song, felt like a test he was taking against a ghost. That's when he thought of the invitation. His younger brother, Darnell, had been the one to tell him it was a bad idea. They'd been shooting hoops at the park near their mother's house, the same court where they'd grown up playing, where Marcus had once believed he'd go pro before reality and a torn ACL taught him otherwise. "Man, why would you even do that?" Darnell had asked, holding the ball against his hip. "You marrying Simone? Not still fighting with Diane?" "I'm not fighting," Marcus had said. "I'm just extending an invitation. Being mature." Darnell had given him that look, the one their mother used to give them when they were kids, trying to lie about who broke the lamp. "Mature is moving on," Darnell had said. This is something else. But Marcus had sent it anyway, because somewhere deep in the part of him he didn't like to examine, he needed Diane to see him happy. He needed her to see what she'd walked away from. He needed her to know that he'd found someone who didn't look at him like he was a disappointment waiting to happen. He needed her to hurt the way he'd hurt. Diane told her sister, Lorraine, about the invitation on a Friday evening. They were sitting on Lorraine's back porch, watching the kids play in the yard, drinking sweet tea that was more ice than anything else. He invited you to his wedding? Lorraine's voice climbed an octave. Girl, that man has lost his entire mind. Maybe, Diane said quietly. Maybe nothing. That's disrespectful. That's petty. Lorraine stopped, studying her sister's face. Wait, you thinking about going? Diane didn't answer right away. She watched Kennedy and Lorraine's kids playing tag, their laughter carrying across the yard like music. She thought about the last conversation she'd had with Marcus before the divorce was finalized. How they'd sat in the parking lot of the lawyer's office, both of them crying, both of them too proud to reach across the center console. How he'd said, I don't know how we got here. And how she'd said, I do. We stopped looking at each other. I think, Diane said slowly, I need to see it with my own eyes. I need to see him happy with someone else. Really happy. Because if he is, then maybe I can finally let go of the version of us I keep going back to at 3 in the morning. Lorraine was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You know this could go real wrong, right? I know. You know he might be trying to hurt you. I know that too. Then why? Diane set her glass down on the porch railing. Because I'm tired of carrying him around like he's still mine to worry about. And I can't put him down until I know he's okay. Even if that sounds crazy. Lorraine reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. It doesn't sound crazy. It sounds like you loved him. Really loved him. Yeah, Diane said softly. I did. The thing about Marcus and Diane's marriage was that it hadn't ended because of infidelity or violence or any single catastrophic event. It had ended the way most marriages end, quietly, over years, through 1,000 small abandonments that neither of them noticed until it was too late. Marcus had always been ambitious. When they'd met at Howard University, he'd been the guy with the plan, get the degree, get the job, build the life, provide for the family. Diane had loved that about him. His certainty, his drive, the way he talked about their future like it was a blueprint already drawn. What she hadn't understood then, what neither of them had understood, was that blueprints don't account for the weight of trying to be perfect, for the slow erosion that happens when providing becomes more important than presence, when being strong means never admitting you're drowning. By the time Kennedy was born, Marcus was working 60-hour weeks, climbing the corporate ladder with the kind of determination that looked like success from the outside. And it was success. The house in the suburbs, the good school district, the retirement account that actually had money in it. But success has a cost. And for Marcus, that cost was being there for the moments that didn't fit into a quarterly review. Diane had stopped expecting him at dinner. Then she'd stopped expecting him before Kennedy's bedtime. Then she'd stopped expecting him to remember what they'd talked about the night before, because she'd realized he hadn't really been listening. He'd been thinking about the next meeting, the next deadline, the next thing he needed to fix or prove or accomplish. She tried to tell him. Lord knows she tried. But every conversation had become a fight, and every fight had ended with him saying, I'm doing this for us, and her wanting to scream, but there is no us anymore. There's just you and the life you're building, and me watching from the sidelines. The affair rumor had been the final crack, even though it turned out to be nothing. A coworker had seen Marcus having lunch with a woman from another department, told Diane, just in case she should know, and even though Marcus had explained it was just a work meeting, even though Diane had believed him, something had broken in that moment. Because her first thought hadn't been, of course not. Not Marcus. Her first thought had been, why would I even be surprised? And that's when she'd known it was over. Not because she didn't love him, but because somewhere along the way, she'd started expecting the worst from the man she'd promised her life to. And that was no way to live. The divorce had been Marcus's idea, technically, but only because Diane had said the words that made it inevitable. I can't keep being lonely in my own marriage. He'd looked at her like she'd slapped him. Then he'd said, if that's how you feel, maybe we shouldn't be married. And she'd said, maybe we shouldn't. Neither of them had meant it. But neither of them had known how to take it back. Simone found the guest list 3 weeks before the wedding. Marcus had left it on the kitchen table of the condo they'd moved into together, weighted down by his coffee mug. She'd been checking to make sure her sorority sisters had been added when she saw the name. Diane Wilson, +1. "Baby," she called out. Marcus was in the bedroom, getting ready for work. "Why is your ex-wife on the guest list?" The silence lasted just a beat too long. He came out, still buttoning his shirt, his face carefully neutral. "I thought it would be mature. You know, show there's no hard feelings." Simone looked at him the way you look at someone when you're trying to decide if they're lying or just fooling themselves. "Marcus, baby, I love you. But that's not mature. That's weird." "It's not weird. It's weird," she said again, firmer this time. "You don't invite your ex to your wedding unless you're trying to prove something. And if you're trying to prove something, that means you're still thinking about her." "I'm not still thinking about her." "Then why'd you invite her?" He didn't have a good answer for that. Not one he could say out loud. Not one that didn't make him sound like exactly the kind of man he'd spent 2 years trying not to be. Simone set the list down gently. She was good at that, being gentle when she was angry. It was one of the things he loved about her. One of the ways she was different from Diane, who'd always met his anger with her own, who'd never learned to back down, who'd fought with him like fighting meant you still cared enough to try. "Look," Simone said, "I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're a grown man. But I need you to be honest with yourself about why you did this. Because if you're marrying me to get back at her, or to prove something to her, then we have a problem. A big one." "I'm not," Marcus said. "I'm marrying you because I love you." "Okay," Simone said. But the way she said it made it sound like a question. The week before the wedding, Diane went to see her therapist, Dr. Patricia Howard. She'd been seeing Dr. Howard on and off since the divorce. Whenever the weight of single parenting and career demands and trying to rebuild a life she hadn't planned for got too heavy to carry alone. Dr. Howard's office was in a renovated brownstone in Midtown, the kind of place that smelled like lavender and felt like safety. They sat in the familiar chairs, Diane on the cream-colored sofa, Dr. Howard in the armchair across from her, notepad resting on her knee. "So," Dr. Howard said after Diane had explained about the invitation, "you're going." "I think I am." "Tell me why." Diane had spent the whole week trying to articulate this to herself. "Because I need to know that letting him go was the right choice. I need to see him with someone who makes him happy. I need closure, I guess. I know that sounds like a cliche. Closure is real," Dr. Howard said. "But it's also something you can give yourself. You don't need his permission to move on. I know that. Logically, I know that. But there's this part of me that still wonders if I gave up too soon. If I should have fought harder. If I should have." "Diane," Dr. Howard interrupted gently. "Do you think he was happy in the marriage? Toward the end?" Diane thought about it. Really thought about it. "No. He was miserable. We both were." "Then what exactly are you hoping to see at this wedding?" And that was the question, wasn't it? What did she want to see? Marcus happy? That would hurt, but it would also free her. Marcus miserable? That would be satisfying for maybe 10 seconds before the guilt set in. Marcus realizing he'd made a mistake? That was a fantasy and not even a healthy one. "I think," Diane said slowly, "I want to see that we're both okay. That we both survive this. That we can be in the same room and not fall apart." Dr. Howard nodded. "That's fair. But I want you to prepare yourself for the possibility that he might not be coming from the same place. If he invited you to hurt you, and you show up, you're walking right into that." "I know." "And you're going anyway?" "I'm going anyway." Dr. Howard smiled slightly. "Okay, then let's talk about boundaries." Marcus's mother, Dorothy Wilson, called him the Thursday before the wedding. He was at work, reviewing logistics reports that all blurred together after the third spreadsheet, when her name lit up his phone. "Hey, Ma." Marcus Anthony Wilson. Her voice had that tone, the one that meant she knew something and was disappointed but not surprised. "Darnell told me what you did." Marcus closed his office door. "Ma, it's not. You invited Diane to your wedding to embarrass her." "That's not why I." "Then why?" "Explain it to me, baby, because I'm trying to understand how I raised a son who would do something so cruel." The word hit him harder than he'd expected. Cruel. He'd thought of it as justice, as evening a score, as taking back some small piece of power in a situation where he'd felt powerless. He hadn't thought of it as cruel. She left me, Ma, he said quietly. Baby, you left her long before she walked out that door. You just never moved your body. Dorothy Wilson had a way of saying the truth that made you feel it in your chest. She'd been a nurse for 35 years, and she'd learned how to deliver bad news with compassion, but without sugarcoating it. She'd learned that kindness sometimes meant saying the hard thing, not the easy thing. I was working, Marcus said. I was providing for my family. I was doing what Dad did. Your father was also barely home, Dorothy said. And if I could go back and tell that young woman I was to demand better, I would. But I can't. All I can do is tell you, don't make the same mistakes. Don't marry this girl while you're still fighting with the last one. I'm not fighting with Diane. Baby, this whole invitation is a fight. You know it, I know it, and if Simone doesn't know it yet, she will. And she deserves better than that. They both do. After his mother hung up, Marcus sat in his office with the lights off, watching the sun set through the window. He thought about his father, William Wilson, who'd worked double shifts at the plant to keep them comfortable, who'd missed more Little League games than he'd made, who'd died of a heart attack at 59, 3 weeks into retirement. His father had provided. He'd given them a good life. But Marcus couldn't remember the last real conversation they'd had. Couldn't remember his father ever asking how he felt, or admitting he was tired, or saying, I love you, without it sounding like an obligation. Marcus had sworn he wouldn't be that kind of father. He'd sworn he wouldn't be that kind of husband. And then he'd become exactly that, without even noticing. The day of the wedding arrived with unseasonably warm weather for October. The estate on Riverside looked exactly like the pictures. White columns, manicure gardens, a view of the water that seemed designed specifically for Instagram. Diane arrived alone. Kennedy had offered to come with her, but Diane had said no. This was something she needed to do by herself. She wore a navy dress, elegant but not attention-grabbing, the kind of dress that said, I'm here, but I'm not here. She thought she'd feel anxious walking in, thought her hands would shake, thought her heart would race. But instead, she felt calm, almost peaceful, like she was watching herself from a distance, curious about how this would all play out. The ceremony was being held in the garden. White chairs arranged in neat rows, flowers everywhere, a string quartet playing something soft and romantic. Diane found a seat toward the back, next to an elderly couple who smiled at her warmly. She watched the guests arrive, watched Marcus's family file in, his mother catching her eye and nodding once, a gesture that felt like both acknowledgement and apology. Watched Simone's bridesmaids in their rose gold dresses, laughing and taking photos. Watched the ushers directing people to their seats with practiced professionalism. And then Marcus appeared at the altar with the officiant, and Diane's breath caught. Not because he looked particularly different. He'd gained maybe 5 pounds, lost maybe a little more hair at the temples. But he looked young. That was the word. He looked like the Marcus she'd met at Howard, before the weight of trying to be everything to everyone had settled into his shoulders. He looked hopeful, and seeing him like that hurt more than any elaborate humiliation could have. The ceremony began. The music swelled. Everyone stood. And Simone appeared at the entrance, a vision in white lace, her smile bright enough to light the whole garden. Diane watched Marcus's face as his bride walked down the aisle. Watched the way his eyes filled with tears. Watched the way he mouthed, "You're beautiful," when Simone reached him. Watched the way he took her hands like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. This wasn't a man trying to prove a point. This was a man in love. And Diane felt something shift in her chest. Not jealousy, not regret. Something else. Something that felt almost like relief. The officiant began speaking about love and commitment and the journey two people take together. About how marriage isn't just the happy moments but the hard ones. About choosing each other even when it's difficult. And then, halfway through the ceremony, the officiant said something that made everyone in the audience shift in their seats. Marcus and Simone have chosen to write their own vows. Marcus, would you like to go first? Marcus cleared his throat. He was holding a piece of paper, but he folded it up and put it in his pocket. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Simone, he stopped, started again. I need to be honest with you, in front of everyone here. Because you deserve that. You deserve someone who's all the way in, not someone who's still looking back. A murmur went through the crowd. Simone's smile faltered slightly. I invited someone to this wedding who shouldn't be here, Marcus continued. My ex-wife. And I told myself it was about being mature, about showing that we'd moved on. But that was a lie. The truth is, I invited her because I wanted her to see me happy. I wanted her to see what she'd given up. I wanted her to hurt. Diane felt every head in the garden turn toward her, felt the weight of 100 eyes. But she kept her gaze on Marcus, on this man she'd loved for so many years, on this moment that was spiraling somewhere she hadn't expected. And I'm standing here now, Marcus said, about to marry the most incredible woman I've ever met. And all I can think is, what the hell is wrong with me? Why am I still fighting a war that ended 3 years ago? Why am I letting the worst version of myself show up to the best day of my life? Simone was crying now, but Diane couldn't tell if it was from sadness or something else. I'm so sorry, Marcus said to Simone. You deserve better than this. You deserve better than a man who's still trying to prove something to someone else. And I don't know if I could be that man right now. I thought I could. God knows I wanted to be. But standing here, I realize I've been lying to both of us. The garden was silent except for the sound of the river in the distance. So, I'm asking you, Marcus said, his voice breaking. Can we pause this? Can we take some time? Because I love you, Simone. I really do. But I need to figure out how to love you without using you as proof that I'm okay. Without using us as evidence that I won. The next hour was chaos. Gentle chaos, but chaos nonetheless. The wedding party huddled together. Family members whispered urgently. Someone started crying loudly in the third row. One of Simone's aunties from the sound of it. Diane had stood up and walked toward the exit as quietly as possible, trying not to draw more attention. But before she could make it to her car, she heard footsteps behind her. Diane, wait. She turned. Marcus was still in his tuxedo, tie loosened, looking like a man who'd just survived something. They stood there in the parking lot, the sounds of the wedding that wasn't fading behind them. I'm sorry, he said finally, for all of it, for inviting you here, for trying to hurt you, for everything that happened before. Diane studied his face. Why'd you stop the ceremony? Because halfway through my vows, I looked out at everyone and I saw you sitting there, and I realized you weren't hurt. You weren't jealous. You looked peaceful, like you'd already let me go. And I was still holding on so tight that I was about to ruin another good thing. Simone seems like a really good thing, Diane said softly. She is. She's incredible. But I can't be what she needs until I stop being what I hate. Until I figure out how to forgive myself for being the kind of husband who lost you. Marcus. Diane took a breath. You didn't lose me. We lost each other. And I've spent 3 years being angry at you for all the ways you weren't there. But I was gone too in different ways. I was so busy being disappointed that I forgot how to tell you what I needed. We failed together. Still feels like I failed more. Maybe. But keeping score doesn't change anything. We can't go back and be different people. We can only decide who we want to be moving forward. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Marcus said, You really okay? I'm getting there. Most days I'm good. Some days I'm great. Some days I wake up and the apartment's too quiet and Kennedy's growing up too fast, and I wonder if I made a huge mistake. But then I remember what it felt like to be lonely in my own marriage, and I remember why we had to end it. I made you lonely. We made each other lonely. That's the part I'm trying to accept. It wasn't all you. It wasn't all me. It was just two people who loved each other but didn't know how to be what the other one needed. Marcus wiped his eyes. I really did want you to hurt today. How messed up is that? Pretty messed up, Diane said, but she was almost smiling. But you know what? I think this might have been better. I think you just gave us both something we needed. What's that? Permission to stop being angry. Permission to just be done. Not done in a bitter way. Just done in a way that lets us both move on for real this time. Inside the venue, Simone was sitting in the bridal suite, surrounded by her bridesmaids. Her mother was there too, holding her hand, saying nothing because sometimes there's nothing to say. When Marcus knocked on the door, everyone looked at Simone for permission. She nodded. He came in, still looking wrecked, and knelt down in front of her chair. I'm so sorry, he said again. Simone was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I knew you weren't ready. I think I've known for a while. But I thought maybe if I just loved you enough, if I was enough, you'd choose to be ready. You are enough. Simone, you're... Stop. Her voice was gentle but firm. You're going to tell me I'm incredible and amazing and everything you could want. And maybe that's even true. But it doesn't matter if you're not ready to receive it. It doesn't matter if you're still fighting with your past. So what do we do? Simone took a deep breath. I think we take a break. A real one. And you figure out what you need to figure out. And maybe we find our way back to each other. Or maybe we don't. But I can't marry you today. Not like this. Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. You deserve so much better than what I gave you today. Yeah, Simone said. I do. But you know what? You deserve better than what you gave yourself to. So go figure that out. 3 months later, on a cold January evening, Diane was in her kitchen making spaghetti when her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Kennedy told me you got the promotion. Congratulations. You earned it. She smiled and typed back. Thank you. She told me you started therapy. Proud of you for that. Trying to figure out how to be the kind of father who's actually present. Turns out that's harder than I thought. The fact that you're trying means something. Simone and I are talking again. Slowly. Coffee mostly. Nothing big. I hope it works out. If it's supposed to. Yeah. Me too. Hey, Diane. Yeah. Thank you for showing up that day. I know that sounds backwards, but I think I needed to see you to understand I was ready to let go. She stared at the message for a long time before responding. Then she wrote, I think we both needed it. Take care of yourself, Marcus. You too. She set the phone down and stirred the pasta sauce. Through the kitchen window, she could see the last light of the day fading into dusk. Kenny would be home soon for basketball practice. The apartment would fill with noise and laughter and complaints about homework. The ordinary chaos of a life that was hers alone to build. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Outside Marcus's apartment building, he stood on the balcony with his phone in his hand, watching the same sunset from a different angle. He thought about the wedding that never happened, about Simone's face when he'd stopped the ceremony, about his ex-wife sitting calmly in the third row, witnessing his breakdown without flinching. He thought about his father and the ways he'd inherited silence like it was a family heirloom, about his mother's voice on the phone saying, You left her long before she walked out that door. He thought about therapy, the kind his father would have seen as weakness, the kind that was teaching Marcus that strength isn't about how much you can carry alone, but about knowing when to ask for help. And he thought about Simone and whether they'd find their way back to each other, whether he could become the kind of partner who didn't need his love to prove anything, who could just love without keeping score. He didn't know the answer yet, but for the first time, he was okay with not knowing. A year later, on a Saturday afternoon in early fall, Marcus and Diane found themselves in the same space again. This time it was Kennedy's junior year basketball game. Marcus had made it. For once, he'd actually made it. He'd blocked the time on his calendar, left work early, driven the hour and a half to the school gym. Diane was already there, sitting in the bleachers with Lorraine. When Marcus walked in, she saw him immediately. Their eyes met across the gym. She waved. He waved back. He climbed the bleachers and sat one row behind her, close enough to talk, far enough to give her space. She's starting today, Diane said, not turning around. I know. She texted me. 3 exclamation points and 5 emojis. She was nervous you wouldn't make it. I made it. I can see that. They watched Kennedy warm up with her team. She had Diane's grace and Marcus's height. She moved across the court like she belonged there. How's work? Diane asked. Good. They promoted me to VP, which means more meetings and less logistics, which is both good and terrible. Congratulations. Thanks. How's the new position treating you? It's a lot, but it's good. I'm learning to delegate, which is hard for me. You? Ms. I can't do it myself. Shut up, she said, but she was smiling. They fell into comfortable silence. Then Marcus said, Simone and I set a new date. April. Small ceremony this time. Just family and close friends. That's wonderful, Marcus. Really, it is. We did the work. Both of us. Figured out how to be honest about what we need. It's different now. Better. I'm glad. Are you seeing anyone? Diane laughed. You know, I'm not. And I'm okay with that. I'm figuring out how to be whole by myself first. Maybe that sounds lonely, but it doesn't feel lonely. No, Marcus said quietly. That sounds smart. The game started. They cheered when Kennedy scored. They groaned when she got fouled. They lived in that moment, in that gym, watching their daughter do something she loved, and for once, neither of them was anywhere else. After the game, Kennedy's team won by 12, and she scored 15 points. The three of them went to get burgers at the diner near the school. Kennedy sat between them in the booth, still in her jersey, recounting every play like they hadn't just watched it happen. "Did you see that three-pointer in the fourth?" she asked, eyes bright. "We saw it," Marcus and Diane said at the same time, then laughed. Kennedy looked between her parents, something soft passing across her face. "I'm glad you both came," she said quietly. "We're glad too, baby," Diane said, squeezing her daughter's hand. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice to stay steady. They ate their burgers and shared fries, and Kennedy talked about college scouts and upcoming games and maybe trying out for AAU. And for that hour, in that diner booth with the vinyl seats and the fluorescent lights, they were just three people who loved each other. Not perfectly, not without history, but sincerely. And when the check came, Marcus reached for it first, but Diane was faster. "I got it," she said. "You sure?" "I'm sure. Next time's on me then." "Deal." Outside, in the parking lot, they stood by their separate cars, the autumn air turning cool as the sun set. "This is good," Marcus said. "Us, being able to do this." "It is," Diane agreed. Kennedy hugged her father first, then her mother, then headed toward Diane's car, earbuds already in, scrolling through her phone. "Marcus," Diane said before he could walk away. "Yeah, I'm proud of you. For doing the work. For showing up." He nodded, emotion flickering across his face. "I'm proud of you too. For holding the line when I wasn't holding anything." They hugged then, brief, respectful, but real. Two people who'd loved each other deeply, hurt each other badly, and somehow found their way to something like peace. That night, Diane sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching the steam rise in the dim light. Kennedy was upstairs doing homework, music playing softly from her room. She thought about the wedding that wasn't, and how sometimes the worst thing that almost happens becomes the best thing that never did. She thought about Marcus's face when he'd stopped the ceremony, the fear and the courage both right there on the surface. She thought about the version of herself that had walked into that garden, armor on but heart open, ready to witness her own ending. She picked up her phone and scrolled through old photos. Found one from their honeymoon in Jamaica, both of them so young, so sure that love was all you needed. Looked at it for a long moment, then archived it, not deleting it, just putting it in its proper place. Part of her history, not her present. Then she opened a new note and wrote, "Things I'm learning. 1. You can love someone and still need to leave them. 2. Closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you create. 3. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. And sometimes getting to indifference is the kindest thing you can do. 4. You don't have to be perfect to be a good parent. You just have to show up. 5. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well. Actually well. Not performing wellness, but finding it." She saved a note. Maybe she'd add to it. Maybe she wouldn't. But it felt good to write it down. To acknowledge how far she'd come from that day in the lawyer's parking lot when she'd thought her life was ending. Her life hadn't ended. It had changed. And change, she was learning, was different from failure. Across town, Marcus was sitting on his balcony, the same one where he'd stood after texting Diane that day months ago. Simone was inside, reading on the couch, her feet tucked under her, glasses on. She'd moved in a month ago, but slowly, carefully. They were building something new, something honest. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Your father would have been proud of you today." "I am too." He smiled, typed back. "Thanks, Ma. Love you." He thought about his father, about all the things William Wilson had carried and never said, about the heart attack that had come from 30 years of stress and silence, about the legacy of quiet suffering that Marcus had almost passed on to Kennedy. But almost doesn't count. He'd stopped. He'd turned around. He'd asked for help. That had to mean something. Simone slid open the balcony door and joined him, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. I think I actually am. Good game today? Great game. Kennedy was incredible. You should have seen her. Next time I'll come with you. If that's okay. Marcus looked at her. This woman who'd stayed when she had every reason to walk away. This woman who'd made space for his healing instead of demanding he already be healed. I'd really like that, he said. They sat together in the cooling night, the city lights spread out before them, each of them thinking about the paths that had led them here. The mistakes, the repairs, the slow, hard work of becoming people who could actually love well instead of just saying they did. Inside the apartment, Marcus's phone lit up with a notification. The wedding album proofs from the photographer who'd apparently decided to send them anyway. He'd look at them later. Or maybe he wouldn't. Either way was fine. Because the thing about the wedding that never happened was that it had taught him something the one that did never could have. That sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what you actually need. That healing isn't about proving you've moved on. It's about actually moving. That the people you love aren't trophies. They're human, complicated, worthy of your full presence or your full absence, but never half of you while you save the rest for old ones. And that sometimes the moment you think you've won is actually the moment you finally stopped keeping score. Somewhere in the space between what was and what could be, three people were learning the same lesson in different ways. That forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing every day not to let the past hold the present hostage. That family isn't just the people you're tied to by blood or history. It's the people you choose to show up for, honestly, again and again. And that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is refuse to be the person your pain wants you to be. The invitation had been meant to humiliate, but it had become something else entirely. A moment of reckoning, a doorway to truth, a chance to stop running and just be. And in the end, that was the real shock. Not that someone showed grace in the face of cruelty, but that cruelty, when confronted with grace, sometimes transforms into something worth remembering. The autumn light faded. The day ended. And three lives, once tangled together into one impossible knot, began to unspool into separate threads, still connected, but no longer twisted so tight that no one could breathe. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The invitation sits now in a box somewhere, in the back of a closet, in a home where old things go when you can't throw them away but don't want to see them every day. The cream-colored envelope, the embossed lettering, the name written in careful handwriting that once meant ownership and now just means history. Maybe one day, years from now, someone will find it and ask about the wedding that never was. And maybe the story will be told, the whole messy, beautiful truth of it. Or maybe it won't be. Maybe it'll just stay there, a relic of a moment when three people stood at a crossroads and chose healing over winning. Either way, the light moves on. The seasons change. The people who are broken begin, slowly, to become whole. And somewhere, a daughter grows up watching her parents choose grace. Watching them forgive. Watching them show up, imperfectly, but consistently. She learns from what they didn't say as much as from what they did. She learns that love is a verb, and that endings, when handled with care, can become the most honest kind of beginning.